I want to welcome everyone to our biannual California Ocean Litter Prevention Strategy webinar, and happy Plastic Free July. Just as a background, we are going to be recording this webinar, and it will be made available on the OPC website in the coming weeks. And attendees will be muted for most of today, but we welcome your questions in the chat box, and we have folks monitoring the chat throughout the webinar. So feel free to ask each other questions, answer questions in that. And during our Q&A period, we will, Christy and I will facilitate and call on folks, so you can raise your hand using the React button and the raise hand feature on Zoom. If you have any technical issues, you can ask in the chat. You can also try to rejoin the meeting. There's also a dial-in number in the Zoom information. And feel free, please, to also add your name, affiliation in the chat, and also let us know ways that you are celebrating Plastic Free July in the coming months. And just to back up, for those of you who aren't familiar with the California Ocean Litter Prevention Strategy, it was jointly developed by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Marine Debris Program, where Christy is, and the California Ocean Protection Council, where I work. This was developed in 2018. The Ocean Litter Strategy, or OLS, as we call it, outlines actions to prevent and reduce ocean litter in California. And we're looking forward to today's webinar, and really a big thank you to the California OLS community for joining us today. So as I said, I am with the California Ocean Protection Council. I am the Water Quality Program Manager. The California Ocean Protection Council is a state cabinet level body within the Natural Resources Agency, and our mission is to protect California's ocean and coastal resources by advancing research, informing science-based policy, and working collaboratively through partnerships. We have a long-standing commitment to addressing marine debris and plastic pollution, and in my role, I am the lead on programs, policies, and research related to plastic and land-based pollution within OPC. And now I will pass it on to Christy.
Thanks, Christine, and good morning, everybody. It is such a pleasure to be here today, and so happy to see so many of you and some new faces as well, so welcome. As was mentioned, my name is Christy Kehoe, and I support the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA, and the Marine Debris Program. I serve as our California Regional Coordinator, and I am based in the Oakland area, but I help support our projects and initiatives across the state as well as binationally with Mexico. And I'm lucky enough to co-facilitate the Ocean Litter Strategy along with the Ocean Protection Council, but most importantly, the community, which is made up of yourself. So really excited to be here today, and I'll speak to a few more updates on the Marine Debris Program sites in just a bit.
All right, thanks, Christy. And again, none of this is possible without our amazing OLS community that we have in the state. And so thank you for taking time to join us today. And with so many familiar faces, we know that you have spent a lot of time on previous webinars and work group calls. So a huge shout out of appreciation for all of you. And for those of you who haven't joined us before, welcome. It's so great to see new names on this webinar. And I would love to start with a quick poll just to see what your experiences are with the OLS, and we can just see where people are coming from in your experiences so far. All right, I see some results coming in. I'll give it another minute for anyone else who wants to join in on the poll. All right, so I hope everyone can see our results here, but we have a couple folks who have been really involved in the OLS, so thank you for joining us, and a lot of newer folks in our meetings. It looks like fairly even distribution across the different goals that people are working on, which makes sense. Our OLS was really, the stakeholder goals were really driven by community input and a nice mix of folks involved. And I am especially excited to see that we have some people outside the US and outside California who are on this call. So thanks for joining us. And thank you, of course, to all our Californians as well. But this is great. And we hope to continue, the community engagement. And again, feel free to network and chat with each other throughout this webinar on the chat. Okay, so moving on. We are using this webinar to provide updates on OLS implementation, and these have been used to monitor progress in achieving the OLS goals to reduce ocean litter and marine debris. It's also meant to strengthen community and foster relationship building. So again, that networking, and I know this is a Zoom virtual webinar, but we want to encourage folks to meet each other and chat about the work. We're also using this to learn about updates and developments from our community members and to check in with our work groups. So we're treating this a little bit as a hybrid of our work group meetings and our webinars. So if you've been to those and are familiar with those, this will be an opportunity to share updates from those work group specific goals, but also hear from researchers and, again, a more general update on OLS as our webinars have been. Our agenda today will include a series of guest speakers and presentations, and Chrissy will go over an overview of the OLS and progress made to date. There are some updates from the NOAA Marine Debris Program, from OPC's engagement on plastics work, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion, questions, and updates from all of you as you want to share. And just a reminder for today's discussion, just to please be mindful and open to all of the viewpoints and perspectives within our community, to keep comments constructive, to be respectful as we're engaging with each other, and a reminder, we're all here to work together and not point fingers or anything. So I know this is not necessarily needed to say within this wonderful community, but just to establish the ground rules for all of us for today. So with that, I will pass it on to Christy.
Thanks, Christina. That's a good segue to talk about our community and the progress that we've made with the ocean litter strategy. So what I'm going to do really briefly is do my best to do what we've done and where we're at and maybe where we're going. And then we'll hear from speakers today that are really furthering these actions further. So with that, let's provide some context. Next slide, please. So just as a brief background, the ocean litter strategy was developed in 2018, which was a community-driven approach. So this was all hands on deck. Christine mentioned that it was co-led by the Ocean Protection Council alongside Marine Debris Program, but we had other groups such as California Sea Grant helping with facilitation, as well as the partners actually suggesting and leading this action. So really want to focusing on the word community. In California, with our plan, we have 64 actions that highlight quite a diverse amount of debris and action topics themselves, to land-based debris, single-use plastics, consumer debris items, to ocean-based debris, derelict fishing gear, abandoned derelict vessels, and anywhere in between. And pictured here, and why I wanted to stop here is this is just one example of a screenshot of a page. And really what I want to emphasize, if you look into the action items, next to it is lead and partner organizations. And I just want to keep emphasizing how important it is that we work with partners and the work that you do on the ground. This was led and being led by your groups, by entities, and this could not have been furthered without you. And so with that, next slide. Kind of the broad range of what this plan includes is these 6 goal areas. So this includes really topics that were generated and created by the community, including source reduction through mandates and incentives, source reduction through production, design, and management. Other goal areas focusing on waste management, research, behavior change, as well as ocean-based debris and prevention. And really through this approach, we really are trying to holistically try to tackle this issue one step at a time. Next slide, please. Can't mention it enough. These are just some of the partners that have helped and supported the groups throughout the years. I think originally when we started out this plan, there was roughly 50 partners, and I know our mailing list has grown to over 200 and beyond. And so I know many groups have helped and participate along the way. So I want to note here that our partners include nonprofits, state agencies, universities, researchers, civil society, sanitation, stormwater, you name it. We really view everyone as part of this community, and as such, ownership of this plan belongs to the larger community. Next slide, please. And with that, as representing the government, I know we love to have plans and reports, and we do our best to keep this alive. And so throughout the year since 2018, there's been many developments. We've had webinars such as today. We also have held work group meetings where it was a little bit more intimate, where you get to know folks working in similar goal areas. We also have done reporting. And then, to the best of our ability, trying to use our mailing list to share out funding and other opportunities, as well as to share information publicly, which will include today this webinar. Next, please. And then lastly, just as a reminder for folks, as part of us being transparent and sharing these progress updates, we do have an implementation spreadsheet. I will add all of this into the chat just a second from now. But what we do at a semi-annual basis is try our best to collect data, but we do this throughout the year. So if there's any updates that you want to include that are tied to any of those goals, or you want to learn more, please reach out to Christine and I. We are all ears to help. With that, I think that was my short slide, because I want to make sure we actually hear from the folks in the community that are doing the good work. So with that, oh, I forgot I'm going next. So anyway, forgive me. With that, before I kick it off, I do have a few slides that I wanted to share. So before I do that, when I still have the mic, just a few updates on the marine debris program side that I wanted to make sure folks are available, and then we'll kick it off to Christine in just a second. So again, I've introduced myself, but I do support the NOAA Marine Debris Program, and just really excited to be here today. So I'm going to do my best to provide, next slide, please, a really high level of the Marine Debris Program, a little bit of what we've been working on, and sprinkling in some new updates in between that. Next slide, please. Since we have so many new folks on the call, just a bit of a background about the Marine Debris Program. We were established in 2006 as the federal lead to address marine debris across the United States. And our mission is to prevent and address the adverse impacts. And so it's something, we've been growing over the years, both in our activities and missions, and our work and our team ourselves. So noting here that we are non-regulatory, but we work with the community and partners, and you'll hear me say community and partners a lot, because that's how we get the work done, really to see those goals. So next slide, please. I wanted to put the framework in which our program is able to work with the community and our partners, such as yourselves. And so here's our pillared approach that we really do our best to follow. Really want to tackling, kind of similar to the ocean litter strategy, trying to do it as holistic as possible. So this includes prevention, removal, research, monitoring, detection, response, and coordination. I do not have time to go into updates for each of these today, but information can all be found on our website. With that, I'm going to cover just a few of our pillars and some recent news. Next slide, please. So under prevention and removal, we all know the importance of turning off the tap, stopping the source of debris. And so that is something that our program has fortunately been able to fund throughout the years, in addition to removal, knowing that we need to get debris out of the environment. And so I want to flag here today just updates under the Biden-Harris bipartisan infrastructure law, which was a really great opportunity for the program to further our work in marine debris. Just for context, back in 2011, the Marine Debris Program was awarded or allocated $150 million to address marine debris. It was a huge amount. We are so excited about it. And throughout the past few years, we've been doing our best to allocate those fundings to get it out to the door, to get to that work. And so in California, we've been really lucky to partner with the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, as well as California State Parks. Those announcements will be coming soon as far as new notice of funding opportunities, but excited to share I'm optimistic for both large-scale removal opportunities, such as what you see here, derelict fishing gear, abandoned and derelict vessels, as well as other opportunities for interception, such as trash traps, trash devices. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to share more news to our mailing list later this summer. So keep an eye out for that if you work in those spaces. And I also want to note we are able to work with other groups such as Boat US Foundation that has active abandoned and derelict vessel programs. So I'll put all those links in the chat, but just letting you know there's a lot of exciting stuff happening, hopefully in the next month or so. Next slide, please. All right. And then in our next world, we all know the importance of research and trying to address those questions that we just don't have those answers to. And so that is something that our program has been really fortunate enough throughout the years to have different types of research. And for the purposes of today, I wanted to do a shout out that we're really excited to be working with the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, so NECES, for helping governments estimate the cost for plastic pollution, taking into account of plastic waste entering the environment. So looking at the social costs. So that project just started out and we're excited to see that. But in addition to that, we have projects closing out with UC Riverside as well as San Diego State University that's doing some really cool microplastic and plastic feet in transport. So more on that on our website. Next slide, please. And what I'm beyond excited to share today of breaking news as of yesterday or the day before, after many, many years of feedback and public review and congressional reviews, I am beyond honored to share that the federal report on microfiber pollution was released earlier this week. This is a report that was made in part of the Interagency Marine Debris Coordinating Committee, with the report focusing on microfiber pollution. And this was funded through the Marine Debris Program and the Environmental Protection Agency's Trash Free Waters Program. I think I saw Erica on here, but could not have been done well without the work of Materivolve that really helped lead and collect these spots. And so I kind of snapshot some of the infographics here, but just for your awareness, things included this in this report include a definition of microfiber, assessment of sources and prevalence, recommendations for standardized methodology, recommendations of reductions, and most importantly, a plan on how the federal government can be involved in this space, which I'm really excited to be looking for. So again, after I'm done speaking, I will add all these links into the chat. All right, just a few more, I promise. Next slide. In the world of research and monitoring, I just also wanted to share that the Marine Debris Program is continuing our flagship program, the Marine Debris Monitoring and Assessment Project. And I actually saw my colleague leading that. So Jess M in the chat, if you have any questions for monitoring, she is here today. Where I'm excited about this is our standardized approach. This is different than the Marine Debris Monitoring mobile application. I'm referencing this standardized approach. We've been really tailoring and updating this throughout the years with our citizen science, and really excited to share here today that there is renewed and excited interest to build this out on a national scale and perhaps building that out more standardized across quite a number of years. So I wish I had more to share today, but I am excited today that you'll see more from us with standardized approach across the US. All right, two more and then I'm out of here. Next one, please, Christine. Since it is the timing of summer, which is typically Atlantic hurricane season and other cyclone seasons, I just wanted to have a spot here just as a NOAA, as a response agency. Although the Marine Debris Program doesn't necessarily respond immediately, we are here to help in the name if there is a natural disaster or extreme weather. We typically work with states and localities, such as here you see Emergency Response Guide. We really are here to help you. I hope that we don't get another Hurricane Hilary or atmospheric river or whatnot, but in the case we do, please reach out to me if you see any severe marine debris events. I will be reporting those up to NOAA. So thank you for that. And then a thing to look forward to is there's some really cool binational emergency response work happening with this area in the Tijuana River Reserve. So more on that later. And then my final slide, thank you, Christine, next, is I just want to share that with coordination being our pillar and the importance of this ocean litter strategy, that the Marine Debris Program is here to help, and we are looking forward to furthering this over the years. So with that, if you would like to contact me, next slide, here is my information. I am sure you probably have my emails if you've been on many of the email list. But with that, I will put all these links in the chat, and I'm going to take a pause so you can hear from some other great folks on that. So with that, thank you all so much. Christine, off to you.
Thank you, Christy, for that great overview. I just have two updates from OPC today. And first is an overview of our involvement at the fourth session of the International Negotiating Committee to develop international instrument or a treaty on plastic pollution. We will hear more about this in depth from one of our speakers later in the webinar, but I just wanted to highlight California's engagement in this process. So at Inc4, which was in Ottawa, Canada in April, we had staff from OPC and our colleagues at CalRecycle in attendance. And our engagement here was really to have that international exchange, as well as to elevate and showcase what California is doing to tackle plastic pollution. And so it was an opportunity to really bring our lessons learned, our solutions, what are we doing to an international stage, and to learn from others about what they're doing and take from their lessons learned. So really that international exchange. Sorry, I just said that. So California and both our colleagues at CalRecycle and our staff at OPC, our Deputy Director, Caitlin Kalua, presented on a panel that focused on the role of subnational governments in tackling this pollution. We also engaged with several different entities, including meetings with other subnational governments, with national agencies from Canada. We have a memorandum of cooperation with Canada as a state. And we also met with scientists, many of our partners, some of whom are on this call today, and other experts who were at Inc4 to kind of hear about what's going on, what they were working on, and again, to share what we have done as a state to tackle plastic pollution, and in particular, our statewide microplastic strategy, which is still one of few in the state and in the world. Our messages from OPC that we brought to Inc4 were really focused on source reduction, which is highlighted in our microplastic strategy. And again, recognizing that plastic pollution is persistent and pervasive, and plastics, especially microplastics, are really hard to remove once they're in the environment. We also discussed the importance of local and state governments, so subnational governments, and we heard from others from other countries, provinces, districts, whatever the organization level is in their country. But we really heard a lot about the critical role that as a state, as other subnational governments play in combating this global plastic pollution crisis. It's often, those who are the ones on the ground dealing with this directly. And so we had a really engaging experience there, and we are preparing for potential engagement at Inc5. And again, we'll hear more on this later in the webinar. And my second update is on our statewide plastics monitoring project, which I know, again, I see a lot of familiar names on this webinar, but I'll just go over this very quickly for those who aren't familiar with this project. This is one of several that OPC has invested in to address plastic pollution. Monitoring is a key priority in our statewide microplastic strategy, and this project is intended to develop a statewide program for both macro, larger plastic debris and microplastics. And it's done in partnership with the San Francisco Estuary Institute. So the background of this is that, there are a lot of requirements to reduce and prevent the flow of trash and plastic debris into California waters, but there is not a statewide consistent monitoring program to really understand if those requirements are working. So the purpose of this is really to establish that baseline of plastic and microplastics data, to identify any trends in the contamination, evaluate impacts and community benefits of reducing trash and microplastic pollution, to track progress in any of the measures that are implemented. So understanding, the impacts of a plastic bag ban or single-use ordinances, and to inform future management measures to really identify, whether priority sources, whether priority locations, that sort of thing. And the vision of this project is to inform a consistent, coordinated, multi-agency approach through a broader program and network that includes partners that might already be doing this work, state agencies that are already doing some of this work, and again, to leverage existing efforts and to coordinate all of those in a statewide program. Our goal is to have a pilot in late 2025 to do this. And I'll go over a little bit more of the timing of this project as well. And the bigger update here today is we conducted several webinars and meetings to get input from communities. So this was done in March to April, and I know many of you were on those calls, so thank you for joining those and providing your feedback. But this was meant to both share information and increase awareness of this project and plastic pollution, what the state is already doing, but also importantly to get input and feedback from our community members. So we asked questions about priority types of debris and sources, monitoring locations, specific concerns that folks had about the impacts of trash and microplastics, whether that's environmental concerns, impacts on communities and kind of societal harms, and the efficacy of management actions, as well as try to understand whether existing programs, what is already happening that people are doing to address this in their own communities. Again, so contributing to that leveraging that is part of the vision of this statewide program. This was done through 6 webinars, 2 of which were statewide and 4 were focused regionally to get at those specific concerns. We also had an online survey that provided a list of questions, and we got really good feedback from all of these. So again, thank you very much to those who participated in this. And we really heard, kind of loud and clear that source reduction is a high priority across the feedback we got, in addition to really the challenges with enforcing plastic ordinances that are sort of more regional or local. We heard concerns from community members that those were difficult to enforce, and the need for a statewide approach to some of these, including any type of product ban and monitoring, and again, enforcement. We also heard about specific impacts, locations, and sources within different regions, and that was part of why we also had that regional approach to really understand those priorities. And so that was our first kind of opportunity for community engagement, but as this project continues, there will be further opportunities to provide feedback. Right now, the report out to kind of inform the development of this program is in development, and the draft monitoring plan is anticipated to be released for public comment in early 2025. So that will be the next opportunity to provide some input. And at that point, we'll have a lot of information for the public to look at and review and provide comment on. Our goal is to have a final monitoring plan and strategy in late summer of 2025, and again, have ideally a pilot at the end of 2025, pending the development of this plan and available resources. So those are all the updates I had on the OPC side, but if anyone has questions for either Christy or myself, please go ahead right now. And I will put in the chat a link to our OPC posted a little brief blog about our engagement at the plastics negotiations. So I'll put that in right now. Wynn, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's so cool to see all the things that y'all are doing right now. I was wondering, do you see the ocean litter strategy kind of getting like the next level of the ocean litter strategy is the plastic strategy, or will both exist, in parallel?
That is a great question. And as you point out, we have multiple different strategies going on. Christy and I are really thinking about the next iteration of the ocean litter strategy. So there will be, in the coming months and next year, a lot of opportunities to contribute to that development. But we do plan on having an ocean litter strategy 2.0, for lack of a better term, that will be informed by our statewide microplastic strategy, that will be informed by, ideally, the plastics monitoring program we have going on. But again, with all of these kind of happening concurrently, we would love for those to be additive and not repetitive, and also for our next OLS to be really informed by your feedback from the OLS community. What have we learned from this experience? But anyways, there will be a lot of opportunities in the coming months. Christy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, I think you captured that well. And thank you, Wynn, for just excitement and bringing up potential futures. It's something that I know Christine and I are trying to navigate. There's so much happening that we don't want to be redundant for like any of the work happening across the state. But we do want to like cater to the needs of this community. If it's something we want to do, like let's move forward with it. So as Christine mentioned, I think in the coming months, you'll see surveys and we'll have calls just trying to get that feedback. But yeah, I guess more on that in the future, but please give us your thoughts. That's the best of my response, Christine.
Great. Anyone else? And this is not the only opportunity for questions, but just wanted to give a pause here.
I'll jump into the chat I answered. I know I put a lot of links in there, including the microfiber report. And I want to say out loud that I forgot to mention how much public feedback went into that and how much I'm appreciative. I know our team spent so many times looking at just that qualitative and valuable feedback. So just thank you as a community. With that, Vivian.
Good morning. Thank you, Christy and Christine. Quick question for you, and I apologize if I don't know the response. That's why I'm asking. As part of the interaction that we have had at the international level, I understand this is mainly for us to move at state level and probably nationally speaking here. Have we thought about providing support to other countries that are facing the plastic issue? Probably some of you received the Time magazine, the last issue. There was a horrible article about Fiji. So I wanted just to know if there's a future long-term goal for us as part of the integration of the planet to reach out to other countries and see how we can support others.
That is a great question and a really important topic. Thank you, Vivian. So I will just say, at Inc4, part of the goal there was to, again, bring California's lessons learned and solutions to an international stage. And we did meet with several other subnational governments from Canada. There was someone from Spain. There were, different opportunities, but I think that's something we definitely want to keep thinking about. And again, if this is something that's a priority, we can consider how to integrate this into the OLS. There are going to be, I think, additional opportunities related to the Inc process and the international negotiation process that, at least on our end at OPC, we are monitoring. And I can't speak to exactly what our specific role will be at the next one, but we are taking a look to see what our engagement might be. And I know Cal Recycle is also tracking, but I can't speak to their specific actions on this. Yeah, so short answer is I think that's a really great flag and something we certainly want to think about. And from OPC side, we are tracking the Inc process and thinking about how to engage. But the additional partnerships and working with other subnational governments is something that we're definitely looking at.
Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other hands, but if I missed you, please go ahead and just chime in. With that, I will go on to our speakers. So we have 5 speakers today. So first a big thank you to all of them for joining us today and giving their time and expertise with us. First, we have Morgan from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Morgan will be talking about her work on abandoned lost fishing gear, which falls under our OLS Goal 6, to reduce the sources of ocean-based debris and to maximize the efficiency of ocean-based debris cleanup. So Morgan, I will kick it to you.
Great. Awesome. Am I coming through all right?
Yes, you're great.
Fantastic. Okay. Yes. Thanks, Christy and Christine, for inviting me to provide a presentation today on CDFW's work around retrieving lost or abandoned fishing gear. As Christine mentioned, my name is Morgan Ivins Duran. I am an environmental scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Marine Region. And for those of you who were at the February 2022 Goal 6 work group meeting, some of this content will be familiar, but I'll be touching on some new topics as well. Next slide, please. So during my presentation today, I'm going to start by reviewing the importance of addressing lost fishing gear from CDFW's perspective, and then describe some of the different options that exist for retrieving lost fishing gear. I will then touch on outcomes from some recent industry efforts to retrieve lost gear, and then briefly mention a few future planned actions that we have here at CDFW. Next slide, please. So this is probably not a surprise to the folks who are here on today's webinar, but just to set the stage for the rest of my presentation today, addressing entanglements of large whales and sea turtles is a priority for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we really started to put an increased focus on this work after the spike in large whale entanglements that we saw during the 2014 to 2016 large marine heatwave event, more colloquially referred to as the blob. So the figure here on the right shows the annual number of confirmed large whale entanglements reported off of California starting in 1982, which is as far back as this particular data set goes. And the blue horizontal lines there show averages during two separate time periods. So between 1982 and 2013, we saw an average of about 7 large whale entanglements reported off of California each year, and that jumped to an average of 26 if we look at the period from 2014 on. So that's a pretty substantial increase. That's sort of what sparked our increased focus on this, on addressing large whale entanglements. And if you look at the black bars, you can see that we have had a decline since the peaks during the blob, but those levels are still elevated over what we would consider our sort of pre-blob baseline. Our initial focus at CDFW has been on addressing the entanglement issue and lost gear in the commercial Dungeness crab fishery. So one thing I want to make clear is that about half of the confirmed large whale entanglements that get reported every year are in what NOAA calls unidentified gear. So that means we don't know what fishery that gear originated from. But if we look at the other 50% where we do have a sense of the fishery, and if we look at the even smaller percentage where we know the specific fishery origin for that gear, commercial Dungeness crab is the most common. We also know that this fishery puts a large amount of gear into the water with over 100,000 traps deployed each fishing season. So that's what has driven our sort of initial focus on addressing this issue with the commercial Dungeness crab. I also want to mention that CDFW is in the process of applying for an incidental take permit from the National Marine Fisheries Service under Section 10 of the Federal Endangered Species Act. And preventing entanglements and lost gear is a key conservation measure in that ITP application. And so that means that we at the department need to be able to have good information on both gear loss and on retrieval of lost gear so we can evaluate the effectiveness of our efforts on this front. Next slide, please. So in terms of options for retrieving lost or abandoned fishing gear, both the California Fish and Game Code and Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations contain general prohibitions against tampering with gear that does not belong to you. However, there are several exceptions to that general prohibition. So both commercial and recreational gear can be retrieved by another person if they have written permission from the permit holder whose gear that is. Both CDFW employees and publicly employed safety personnel can pull gear when performing their official duties. And uniquely, there are 3 specific exemptions when it comes to commercial Dungeness crab gear. The first is retrieving gear under a waiver issued by our License and Revenue Branch. I won't be going into very much detail about this option, but generally this is a pathway when medical issues or boat malfunctions prevent a permit holder from retrieving their gear. The other 2, which is what I'll be focusing on in the next 2 slides, is our informal pathway under Section 132.2A of Title 14 and the formal trap gear retrieval program under Section 132.7. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a dense slide here, but I am going to be stepping through each piece of it. So this chart goes through a side-by-side comparison of the differences between retrieving lost and abandoned commercial Dungeness crab gear under the formal trap gear retrieval program and the more informal pathway in Section 132.2A. So the first area where there's a difference is that Permits are required for people participating in that formal program, but under the informal pathway, any commercial Dungeness crab vessel operator can retrieve lost gear. There's also a difference in when an unlimited amount of lost gear can be recovered. So in the formal program, that starts 15 days after the scheduled season closure and goes till September 30th. Under the informal pathway, that goes from July 16th to October 31st. One thing I will note is that for both of these options, if the CDFW director is implementing a closure of an area under our risk assessment and mitigation program, we can also authorize an earlier start to that retrieval period. So it can start, sooner if we're implementing a closure to address in-season entanglement risk. Retrieval activities have to be documented on a formal logbook for the trap gear retrieval program or on the retrieving vessel's log under the informal pathway. One of the really interesting differences between these two options is that under the trap gear retrieval program, once that gear is pulled under a permit, that gear actually becomes the property of the retrieval permittee, so that qualified entity that we have issued a permit to. Whereas under the informal pathway, that gear still belongs to the Dungeness crab permit holder who initially set that gear. There is a contact requirement for entities participating in the formal program. They have to contact the Dungeness crab permit holder within 7 days of retrieving the gear in order to start a conversation about returning that gear. And there is no contact requirement if gear is being pulled under the informal pathway. And the last major difference is that people who are pulling gear under the trap gear retrieval program under a formal permit can get paid for that gear's return. So that payment is either provided by the Dungeness crab permit holder in exchange for getting their gear back, or it's provided by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then we levy fees on the Dungeness crab permit holder to reimburse ourselves for that expense. Under the informal pathway, any payment is voluntary by the Dungeness crab permit holder because they still hold the title to that retrieved gear. Next slide, please. So this is another slightly dense slide, but I'll walk through each piece of it. So the table here at the top shows outcomes from the formal trap gear retrieval program during 2021, 2022, and 2023. You can see that participation in terms of both the number of permits issued, which ports actually had active programs, fluctuates from year to year. That's also reflected in the total number of retrieval trips that are conducted and the number of active designated retrievers. So those are the commercial trap fishermen who are actually out on the water pulling the gear from the ocean. And in particular, I want to highlight, we had pretty low activity in 2023. And that appears in part to be due to the fact that the commercial salmon season was canceled in 2023. Usually, particularly in San Francisco and Half Moon Bay, which are two of our most reliable participants, there's a lot of gear that gets retrieved by the commercial salmon fleet under these permits. And that's either because they're trying to clear an area of lost traps before they go fish for salmon, or they're out fishing for salmon, they happen to see a lost trap and they'll pull it out of the water. So without that commercial salmon season, even though we did issue a few permits and there was a limited amount of gear recovery, we really saw much lower success than we have in prior years. And then the bottom table here shows, rather than by calendar year, this is by fishing season, the number of lost traps that were reported to the department, again, just from the commercial Dungeness crab fishery, the number of traps that were reported to the department as being retrieved, either under the formal trap gear retrieval program or under that informal pathway, and what that looks like in terms of a % retrieval. So, in the 2020-21 fishing season and the 21-22 fishing season, we saw pretty good retrieval rates. We were pretty happy with those. And you can see that the number of traps that were retrieved scaled fairly well with the number of traps that were reported as lost. However, again, following the 22-23 fishing season, we saw a really low amount of traps retrieved. And because we had a fairly high number of traps reported as lost, that translates to a pretty low % retrieval of about 3%. So given that and some confirmed entanglements that we had during 2023, which occurred in lost gear, really highlighted the need for a revised approach to this issue. Next slide, please. And this is sort of my last slide here. So that, those outcomes from 2023 have really prompted an increased focus by the California Dungeness Crab Fishing Gear Working Group, which is a multi-stakeholder body that we work closely with on addressing entanglement issues in the commercial Dungeness crab fishery, and the department on addressing lost and abandoned gear. That working group recommended that we expand options for retrieval under the informal program, and that led us to undertake an emergency rulemaking. Typically, state rulemaking processes are on the order of a year or so. We turned this one around in about 8 weeks, which is a benefit of the emergency pathway. Those emergency regs were effective as of March 8th of this year, and that primary change there was adding an option for unlimited gear retrieval to happen sooner than July 16th if we're implementing a closure of an area under that risk assessment and mitigation program, and we did actually use that this year, and retrieval was able to start about 2.5 months earlier than it would have otherwise. The department is currently undergoing scoping for a follow-up sort of standard rulemaking process, and we anticipate releasing proposed regulations for public comment in September. In terms of the trap gear retrieval program, we are also in the early stages of scoping to changes to improve efficacy of the program and reduce the burden both on program participants and on the department. There's a long list of potential changes that we have compiled based on conversations with program participants since we first implemented the program in 2020. That timeline is a little less certain at this point, but we could see public notice of proposed changes as early as next year in 2025. And the last piece I want to touch on in terms of future actions is to mention that the delegated authority that the department has from the state legislature to implement this program is specific to commercial Dungeness crab. So, in the Ocean Litter Strategy Work Plan, there is a mention of considering expansion to other fisheries. And if we wanted to do that, that would require either further action by the state legislature or a rulemaking process through the California Fish and Game Commission, which is a slightly different process than the regulatory process we went through to establish the trap gear retrieval program, which was a department-led rulemaking process. Our Whale Safe Fisheries team primary focus does remain on the commercial Dungeness crab fishery, but we are working to address entanglement risk across all state-managed fisheries. And as those conversations unfold, we may identify that a pathway for retrieving lost or abandoned gear is an important part of that approach. And so we'll be continuing to have those conversations moving forward. Next slide, please. And with that, I will just say thank you again for inviting me to provide this presentation. If you have any questions about options for retrieving lost gear or anything that I touched on today, I'm happy to address a few now if we have time. And otherwise, the first bullet there, Whale Safe Fisheries at wildlife.ca.gov, is the dedicated email account that our whole team has access to, monitors on a regular basis. There's also a lot more information on everything that I described today, as well as our broader set of efforts to address marine life entanglements on our website. And that website also has a option to sign up for our Whale Safe Fisheries email list, where we send out updates related to lost gear and other items.
Thank you so much, Morgan. In the interest of time, I'm going to move to the next speaker, but there is a question in the chat for you, Morgan, if you want to answer that there. But thank you very much. And we will share these links and the email address as well in the follow-up materials for this presentation. All right. So next we will be going to Sam Pottinger, who is a senior research data scientist and software engineer at the Center for Data Science and Environment at UC Berkeley. Sam will be presenting on a model that they've put together, which is really fascinating and related to our OLS Goal 4 on research. And I will stop sharing so you can, and then you can take it away.
All right. Let me try to switch the screens here. So first of all, before I get too far, thank you all so much for your time today and for your contributions to this really important problem. All of us in the team that spans across UC Berkeley and UC Santa Barbara, we're really thankful for the leadership that California and its communities are showing. That being said, as was mentioned earlier, I'm Sam Pottinger, and I'm here representing a joint team across the Eric Wayne Schmidt Center for Data Science and Environment at UC Berkeley and the Benioff Ocean Science Laboratory at UC Santa Barbara. And as was mentioned earlier in the call, we're doing some work related to the Global Plastics Treaty, trying to imagine what a future global plastics instrument might look like alongside policymakers. And we were in Ottawa as well. And what we did for this project is we gathered historical information about mass flows for plastics. This is where plastic is produced, how much, where it's consumed, for what purpose, and then understanding what happens to those plastic products at their end of life. So is it recycled? Is it incinerated? Is it sent to landfill? Or, as all of you know, is it mismanaged? So does it enter into our environment and have a negative impact while it's there? And based off of the relationship between those historic values and a number of variables such as population growth and economic changes, we use machine learning and artificial intelligence to project forward into the future to understand what our plastic future might look like, both under a business as usual scenario. So if we don't do anything and just things kind of go on as they currently are, what might that look like in the future? And then also under different policy scenarios that folks at the UN are considering, what might that future look like instead? So before I get into the detailed tool, which I think is maybe more relevant to this audience, I did want to briefly show this graphic here, just to help orient us to this large problem that we're all trying to solve, trying to think about the leadership that California has shown and replicating some of these things across the globe, or thinking about how they might inform other countries' response to this crisis. But we looked at all of the plastic that's either already entered into the environment as mismanaged waste, or we project to enter into the environment as mismanaged waste between 2010 and 2050. And we dumped it on top of the New York skyline here. So you can see this cumulative numbers spans far upwards, disrupting general aviation if one were to do this. But in addition, again, to showing what this negative future that we're on the pathway for looks like right now, we can also use the same mathematics, the same modeling to understand how a low ambition or a high ambition plastics treaty can start to take chunks out of this really harrowing amount of plastic that we're putting into our environment. So this is where the conversation often starts, sort of at this high level, but I want to show you all a resource that we've made available. This is public and open source online, that really allows us to be very specific about these different policy conditions. So when we first enter into the tool, which is at global-plastics-tool.org, we look first at mismanaged waste, and we see at 2050, 121 new million metric tons of mismanaged waste would be entering into the environment per year. In addition to looking at that number, though, we can also look at incineration levels, how much is going into landfill, and then also the greenhouse gas emissions associated with all of this plastics activity. Now, again, on top of this business as usual scenario, we can look at what different policies might do. For instance, one of the most effective policies that we've found is simply capping the amount of virgin plastic productions. This is from non-recycled resources, to 2020 levels. And here we can see this just takes on its own a huge chunk out of that future, reduces the amount of mismanaged waste that goes into the environment annually at 2050 by 47.3 million metric tons. Now, in addition to looking at these individual policy scenarios, the power of this kind of modeling, this power of this tool, allows us to stack different policies on top of each other dynamically. And again, some of these things are similar to what's been considered at a subnational level as well. But we can see, for instance, if we add to this really important cap to 2020 version production, a 40% minimum recycled by content mandate, add on top of that a consumption tax, and then take the proceeds of that tax and invest it into a global fund similar to the multilateral fund for the Montreal Protocol, invest this into a global fund where we could build out waste infrastructure across the globe. And we can see that with the appropriate level of ambition, it is indeed possible to bring mismanaged waste to near zero, actually close to 2040. In addition to this high-level view, we can also go into a regional view as well. So we can see the impacts of these policies here on end of life, also how we're changing production, how we're changing sector by sector consumption. But then we can also say, for instance, what does this outlook, this policy scenario look like for North America specifically? If I reset the policy scenario here too, we can also create different policy conditions for different parts of the world. For instance, if we're looking at North America here, we could see what would happen if we introduce that minimum recycled content mandate at 50%, and what that does, increasing the amount of recycling that we see per year, decreasing the amount of landfill and incineration. So what I want you to take away from this is that California has provided a really important set of data, a really important set of learnings for the international community to consider. But as we think about plastics as a global problem, that's why we need bodies like the United Nations to be successful in these plastics treaty negotiations. So as all of you are doing your very excellent work in this space, we hope that you consider using some of these open source and open data tools in your work if they become relevant. Also, if you are interested in getting in touch with us to learn a little bit more about what we've done here and to maybe run some different scenarios, there's a contact button at the bottom of the page. I did want to leave a little bit of time for questions since I know we were running behind. I curtailed myself just a tiny bit, but I did want to provide, again, that link for you all here. And once more, from the entire team across our 2 University of California campuses, we're really thankful for the opportunity to present to this esteemed group this morning.
I'll jump in the meantime and just echoing what was in the chat. It's both beautiful and terrifying at the same time, but I'll just add in my 2 cents that I think the work you're doing, it's such a great educational and informative way to kind of speak to like across a really general public. So with that, I see there's actually a hand here. Wynn.
Thanks. Yeah, this is so cool. I'm definitely going to be taking a deep dive into this very soon because I'm thinking about doing some similar projects and might reach out. One thing that I found really interesting about your tool is that a lot of times people think of education as like one of the strongest levers on reducing plastic pollution. But I noticed that that's not a variable in your tool. And I was wondering, like, the thinking that went into the variables that you chose and why you might have chosen these.
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's partly why we have 2 websites. One that's a little bit more public facing, that we actually developed in collaboration with an outside group, and then that internal, or not internal, that more technical tool that is what we've actually taken to the UN. A lot of the policies that you saw there were things that were suggested at some point during the UN negotiation process. So we were kind of letting policymakers take the lead and helping us understand what this possibility space might look like. Education is obviously very, very important. But we were also understanding how we might complement some existing groups that are already doing some of that really important work. And we identified that there was a need to really build some of these interactive and iterative simulation tools for policymakers as they're thinking about the instrument itself, in addition to some stuff that's happening at the consumer level.
Thanks.
Thank you. See, and then I saw a couple questions pop through the chat. Are we collaborating with any groups for this project in particular? It was really these 2 campuses. We also had the benefit of some assistance from 2 professors in China, and that's reflected in a paper that's going to be coming out shortly. The other piece to this, though, is we were in frequent conversation with a number of other modeling groups that were working at the UN. So this is World Bank, OECD, Systemic. So we were all aware of each other's work, and we did some combined presentations together in Ottawa, and I believe at UNEA as well in Nairobi. And then the data is really hard to get. It's a combination of different data sources for different parts of the world. Some of these things are structured data sets like Comtrade from the UN to understand how plastic flows between different parts of the world through trade. However, a lot of the data were actually assembled by looking at industry reports, going through PDFs, sometimes not written in English, to try to assemble this holistic data set that you see here. And I think the last question that I can pull out here is, can we get a link to see those data? I'll drop it in the chat right now.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in as segue. Just thank you so much, Sam, and your team. As you can tell, folks are excited across the board. And if there's anything I can do to get the word out to that with Christine, we're happy to. And this is actually a perfect segue. In the interest of time, we might move on to our next speaker, Win, who is our data guy. And beyond that, Dr. Win Cower is a research scientist with the Moore Institute of Plastic Pollution Research and is also known as Dr. Trash. So Win, and I'm going to have you go next. With that, I see you're all good to go.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about a new study. That was a really good segue. And I asked that question kind of leading to because we have a very similar conclusion to your tool, and that's that production is a very strong lever on pollution. And so I'm going to talk about some of the key findings of this new study that we released a couple months ago. I'll also drop it in the chat here in a second. But big picture, we have a lot of different policies that are looking at how to control plastic production and how to engage with producers. Extended producer responsibility is a really big topic right now. How can we get producers at the table to make sure that they're producing products that are going to be that are not going to cause harm to the environment later on. SB 54 is one of the landmark policies that I've been really excited about lately here in California, thinking about how we can engage producers to reduce plastic pollution. And let's see here. And really, these producers have very strong goals. I mean, some of these 100% of the single-use plastic packaging being recyclable or compostable, 65% of single-use plastic being recyclable, and cutting 25% of plastic production. These are really strong goals, and we need some way to be able to monitor and make sure that we're actually reaching these goals and make sure that we're actually seeing the positive impacts to the environment that we're hoping for. We need this so that we can measure improvements to the environment, assess environmental impact, assess efficacy of these actions, hold individual companies accountable. There's a lot of, in this space, kind of like blaming back and forth, anecdotally, finger pointing, but if we had some data to support some of these conclusions, that might help us. And also, these companies want to be able to report to their shareholders that they're improving their impact on the environment, and we need some mechanism to be able to do that. So we got together, a group of us got together and conducted this study using Break Free from Plastics brand audit data to assess the global producer responsibility for plastic pollution. And I'll just drop that link in the chat. So, drop that here so that people can follow that if they'd like. And so Break Free from Plastic for the past 5 years has been conducting these brand audits. They have over 84 different countries, 1,500 different audits have been done, and dozens of independent organizations have collected this data set. It is definitely the largest data set on branded trash in the environment. And basically what they do is they go out to a site. It's a very simple audit. You go out to a site, you clean up all of the trash that you see in the site. Usually it's like a beach, a park, a road. Clean up all the trash, sort it by brand, and then attribute those brands to the companies that own it. And so here's a map of where all of these audit events have happened. And on the right-hand side, you can also see the distribution of the different audit events by country. And you can see that there are definitely some gaps in where we have data, specifically in like Central and North Africa, South America, Central Asia. We have some gaps, but in general, we have a pretty good distribution of a pretty wide distribution of observations. And we think that these locations are representative of the global plastic pollution that's out there. And so we can take these observations. Every single survey event basically gets one vote. We assess the percent contribution from individual companies for each audit event, and then we average them together. And what this does is it makes it really a robust analysis of how much companies are responsible for the plastic pollution in the environment. And what we're trying to get is an average percent of global branded plastic pollution for each company. And what we found is that Coca-Cola was the largest contributor to plastic pollution. We also can derive some confidence intervals around these percentages. So we're very confident that Coca-Cola is the largest producer of plastic pollution, followed by Pepsi, Nestle, Danone, and Altria. And you can go down the list here. And then we can take all of these companies and sort them from highest to lowest and add them up. And we can get this cumulative percent of branded plastic pollution. And try to understand, like, how many companies do you need to engage with so that you can actually make a big impact on the environment? And we find that the top 5 companies are responsible for 20% of the plastic pollution. And only 56 companies are responsible for 50% of the plastic pollution. So really, it's actually quite a small group of organizations that you need to focus on so that you can make a huge impact on the environment. And this is really the flagship figure that we found. When I did this analysis, I was not sure what we were going to find, and it was shocking. I'm not going to lie. So basically, what we did is we took our mean percent of global plastic pollution and plotted that against the percent of global mass produced by these companies. And this trend, the average tendency of this relationship is a 1-to-1 line. It is very tight. There is a skew upward for food and beverage companies. So food and beverage companies are about an order of magnitude more, creating more plastic pollution versus household and retail companies. But in general, what this really suggests is that plastic production is a very strong lever on plastic pollution. And this makes sense. I mean, this is like fundamentals, right? Even though this is a new finding to science, it fundamentally makes sense. You can, if you didn't produce any plastic, you wouldn't find any plastic pollution, right? So it's kind of simple stuff. But at the same time, very impactful, and I think going to drive a lot of dialogue and a lot of discussion moving forward. And I think that this approach is going to be really helpful for us to solve plastic pollution because plastic production is such a strong lever on plastic pollution. And actually, we published this study just 2 months ago, but it's already being used in lawsuits against plastic polluters right now. Baltimore City is suing the big plastic producers and using our study to support their case. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer questions or talk more about this if people would like.
Thank you. This is great research. And again, I think as we saw with all of our speakers so far, there's a lot of people are excited about this work. So appreciate your presentation. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if there are any hands or questions right now, please feel free, those in the audience. Okay. Oh, Vivian, please go ahead.
Sorry, thank you.
That's okay.
Win, great information. I just wanted to know if, considering the fact that these companies are American companies, is there a way for us to probably penalize these companies for universal pollution, even though it's not, I mean, it's happening here, but of course, this is a worldwide impact?
Great question. Some of the companies are not American based. So some of the ones in the top, like for example, Bakareska Group, I think, and Wings are both Southeast Asian primarily companies. And all of these companies, at least in the top ones, are multinational companies. The plastic production data here is global. So yeah, we are able to do like this. These numbers are our best estimation of the global plastic pollution by each company.
Thank you.
Yeah. And that is important too, because it's actually quite difficult to downscale these results. We need a lot more surveys and a lot more data in individual countries, because right now, I mean, even the highest countries, Indonesia, for example, there's only 100 surveys. Is that representative of everything that's going on in that country? It might be kind of tricky to downscale that. Yeah, Sam?
Yeah, this is really excellent work. I am curious, looking back at that figure that you were showing, that it looks like there were McCain and something else that kind of fell off off
Yeah.
the bottom there. I'm curious if you think that's related to sampling, or if they're actually doing something interesting that we should be trying to learn from. McCain and McCormick, it looks like.
Yeah, yeah. So there is an interesting thing going on with McCormick. One of the things is that they produce spices. And spices get used for a long time. It's not like a soda bottle where you just drink it in an hour and then throw it away. You might have spices up on your shelf for years. McCain Foods, I'm trying to remember exactly what they produce. It could be just an outlier for one reason or another, because it's relatively lower on the mean percent of global branded pollution, and we'd expect there to be more noise around this area, lower versus like up here in this region. This is one of the scarier parts of this plot, because the food and beverage companies up in the highest region are almost in a straight line, like almost no noise around each other, which is kind of crazy. But I do think that we can learn a lot from this, or a lot from the outliers, and think about like, why is Cliff Bar so high relative to where it is in the plot? Well, Cliff Bar produces products which are made to be used on the go outside in the environment, and they encourage you to take their products out into the environment with you. So we find a lot of their products out in the environment, versus, McCain and McCormick and company, their products are used inside of a house. They have a long lifetime. So I think there is something to the variability in this, beyond just like the food and beverage company and household retail companies. That shift, I think, is primarily due to reuse, because household and retail products are reused a lot longer and have longer lifetimes.
Thank you very much, Wynn. And if there are other questions, please put them in the chat. I think great to keep these conversations going. And we will now go on to our next speakers. Before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to make a note, since our next two will be talking about policy updates. I just want to clarify that OPC and NOAA do not support any active or pending legislation, but we are very thankful to have speakers who can talk about these issues. And with that, I will go to Yalin Lee, who is a senior associate at the California Product Stewardship Council, who'll be providing updates on policy in California, which relates to our goals 1 and 2 of the OLS. And with that, take it away, please.
Thank you. I'm just trying to pull up my slides here. 1 second. Okay. Oops. All right, thank you, everyone. My name is Yalin. I'm a senior associate with the California Product Stewardship Council. I'm just going to really quickly gloss over some of our introduction slides. So we're a nonprofit based in Sacramento, and we work on special projects and we work on legislation to kind of focus on this idea, which Wynn already talked about a little bit earlier, which is extended producer responsibility. And so we really just want to make sure that producers are responsible for the end of life management of their products rather than the consumers. And so I'm just going to quickly gloss over just a couple major pieces of legislation. I'm not going to talk about all of them because I believe about 3,000 bills were introduced in the Assembly this year and about 1,500 in the Senate. So if I talk about all of them, we would be here for about the next 3 days. And so I'm just going to quickly touch over some of the major bills. One of the ones that a couple ones I talked about are really talking about this trend of banning PFAS this year. We've seen a lot of bills talking about removing PFAS from our products because we know it's a forever chemical and it has a lot of negative health effects, as you've seen from various research articles that were released this year. And so just the first one I want to talk about is AB 347 by Assemblymember Ting. And this is known as kind of the orphan PFAS bill, where it kind of took up a bunch of different PFAS bills that were introduced and put them all in one bill. And so what this would do is kind of taking action against dealing with PFAS in a bunch of different products, including juvenile products, food packaging, and textiles. Originally, it included cookware and cosmetics, but those were taken out in the most recent amendments. But it's still going to be dealing with removing PFAS in products that are for juveniles, food packaging, and textiles. And this bill is currently doing pretty well, so we're likely to see it headed off to the governor's desk in the next coming weeks. Just to preface it, currently the legislature is in recess. They typically do that every July after 4th of July. And so we're kind of seeing bills kind of at a standpoint right now where they're just a couple steps away from entering the governor's desk in the next month. And so kind of on that trend of PFAS, the next PFAS bill that I want to talk about is going to be AB 2515. This is the reintroduction of a bill from last year. And so what this is doing is actually banning PFAS from menstrual products. And if you've seen the news recently, I believe there's a huge menstrual product recall, particularly for tampons, as it was found that lead and arsenic is present in a lot of our menstrual products. And so not only did this bill remove PFAS, but it will just generally kind of help jumpstart this kind of like idea where we really need to care about and understand what is in our menstrual products, as these are products that are going inside of our body. And so just make it menstrual products safer in general for the general public. And then on that trend of PFAS, we're going to also talk about AB 2761 by Assemblymember Hart, and that is enacting a new act, which is the Reducing Toxics in Plastic Packaging Act. But the toxic that it's specifically targeting is PFAS. And so this would just be removing all of those PFAS from our packaging, which goes very well with other PFAS products that I've talked about just recently. And so just on a couple other bills that I want to touch on, one of the big ones that that's been in the news quite lately is AB 863, which actually was just majorly amended just last month. And so what this would actually establish is a producer responsibility program for flooring. This includes carpets, carpet cushioning, flooring, and synthetic turf. And so we're kind of just seeing this kind of just sprout out of nowhere. And so it's kind of still in play. And so we'll be kind of watching this closely in the next couple of weeks just to see what the opposition and the supporters say about it, as it's quite a revolutionary producer responsibility program. And just another one that's really big is AB 2236. This is actually a co-companion bill. So in the Senate, which I'll talk about later, there is a kind of a twin bill there. Sometimes what they'll do is that they'll put one bill introduced in the Assembly and introduced in the Senate, just so one of them dies and there's another bill that's doing the same thing that will push it on, just to make it more likely that one of them will pass. And so what this is doing is actually just kind of closing those loopholes from our plastic bag ban that was implemented about 10 years ago. As you've noticed, to kind of counteract a plastic bag ban, a lot of places just put really thick plastic bags, which really isn't removing plastic bags from our waste stream. And so what this bill would do is that it would revise the definition of what's considered a recycled plastic bag, recycled paper bag, and have a minimum requirement of 50% post-consumer recycled materials for all the bags in stores after 2028. As I said, there's going to be a companion bill that I'll talk about a little bit later on, but that's kind of the major bills I want to talk about just on the Assembly side. But again, there are about 3,000 other bills that are in play this year. These are just a couple of ones that we want to highlight. And on the Senate bill side, I'm not going to talk about SB 707. I'm going to have a slide about some of our CPSC bills as well as 1280 in just a second. But as I just talked about earlier, SB 1053 is that companion bill to the plastic bag bill that I talked about from the assembly side. And it does the exact same thing where it will revise the definition of the recycled paper bags to make it have a minimum of 50% post-consumer recycled material and close a couple other loopholes in the original ban that was established 10 years ago. A really big one this year, particularly on ocean pollution, is SB 1066 by Senator Blakespear. And what this would do is establish an extended producer responsibility program for single-use marine flares. This has kind of caused a huge wave in the boating community, but we're seeing a lot of support on both sides, from the boating community, general public, and even in the legislature. And so this bill is currently being co-sponsored by the National Stewardship Action Council and Zero Waste Sonoma, and we've been working with them closely as CPSC does do a lot of marine flare work alongside Vivian, who has been very prominent in this meeting. And so we're hoping to see this bill pass this year, and it's been getting a lot of support. Similarly, is SB 1143, which would create an extended producer responsibility program for all household hazardous waste, not including ones that already have a lot of have the program in place, which a lot of them do. But this is really an extreme intensive bill, as it's really targeting all household hazardous waste. Another one that it's really permanent to ocean is SB 1147 on microplastic levels. And what this would do particularly is on drinking water, which will require the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment to actually study the health impacts of microplastics in our drinking water. And this also includes bottled water to really identify what is a safe level and what is an unsafe level of microplastic levels in our drinking water. And then I'm just going to go right on to some of the bills that CPSC is sponsoring this year. One of the big ones is AB2, which is on consumer-owned solar PV panels. And what this would do is just amend the e-waste program to actually include solar panels. This bill is going to be stalled, and we're likely to reintroduce it next year, as we are currently in a lot of intense discussions with the solar stakeholders. We really want to make sure that their voices are heard. And then one of our biggest bills this year is SB 707, which would produce a first of its kind extended producer responsibility program for post-consumer textiles. And so we've been working on this bill and talking with consumers pretty much all across the country and worldwide to make sure that we really make a good program to ensure that there is a good recycling and reuse program for textiles in California. And so this will kind of set the precedent for textile programs all across the country and likely worldwide. And then the last bill for that CPSC is sponsoring is SB 1280. Some of you know, I think some of you worked on our bills from last year, SB 1256 and SB 560, which were all about kind of transitioning California from the single-use 1-pound propane cylinders to the refillable 1-pound propane cylinders. As you know, if you guys barbecue, I know it's summer, the 20-pound propane cylinders are refillable. However, the reusable alternatives are made for the 1-pound propane cylinders, but they're just not currently the standard. And so we really just want to encourage Californians to transition from those single-use to the refillables. And as I'm not going to touch too much on SB 54, as we already talked about it, but just kind of a couple updates on SB 54. Very recently, actually just last week, CalRecycle released their updated draft for the covered material categories. So if you're interested in that, you can go on their website and you can download that to see kind of what new materials will be covered based on feedback from stakeholders. Also, the next advisory board meeting will be on July 19th, which is next week, which from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So if you have any comments you want to have on that covered material categories, you can let the advisory board know next week. And just a quick shout out, as I mentioned before, CPSC in partnership with the California Coastal Commission, the California State Parks Division of Boating and Waterways, as well as CalRecycle, officially launched last year our Make the Electronic Marine Flare Switch campaign. And so this has really just helped transitioning boaters away from the single-use pyrotechnic marine flares to the reusable electronic marine flares. And we're going to be working with jurisdictions all across California to host a series of marine flare collection events for your pyrotechnic marine flares, as well as distribute those electronic flares in both October and early November. So if you're interested in getting updates on that, the QR code there will kind of scan you to our website where you can join our listserv and get updates on those events. And you have any ideas for legislation, or you want to join any of our programs, or just want to know how you can support legislation, feel free to contact CPSC and we'll kind of just bring you in wherever we feel like it will be best fit. And we're always looking for more partners. So we open it to questions. I know we're kind of low on time, but if you feel free to email me at yalin@calpsc.org if you have any questions.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I see there's some questions regarding Senate Bill 1053. In the interest of time, I might ask you, Yalin, if you wouldn't mind responding in the chat. And if we have time after our next speaker, who's also policy-based, we can open the floor if that works for you all. Cool. See a thumbs up there. Well, with that, with no further ado, I'd like to invite our Surfrider Foundation team members that have been a longstanding partner of the Ocean Litter Strategy, and specifically Jennifer Savage, the Senior Manager of Plastic Pollution Initiative at Surfrider, who we asked to speak to on the policy on national and international levels, which I know have come up a lot today, but I'm sure she has a lot more insight across the local as well. So with that, Jennifer, I'm going to start talking. Please take the mic.
Great. Everything good sound-wise and visual-wise? Oh, great.
Yes.
I have new. Okay, thanks so much. So as Christy said, I support our plastic pollution initiative team. Miho Lagar, who is on the call today, does most of our work in California. So thanks to Miho for letting me have this moment here. So let's see. Oh, my slides are not advancing, which is making for an awkward moment. Sorry about that. Maybe. This is what happens when you skip the tech check. Give me 1 second. I apologize, especially as we're running behind, but.
While you do that,
okay.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Right.
Okay.
So we're not seeing the full screen. I have to admit, we are able to see kind of the Google Meets itself, but I can see the bigger picture. I might ask if you maybe can scroll down just a little bit to see the full slide, but
oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Christy.
No problem. And in the interest of time, while you're doing this, I know there was some chat conversation, so I'm not sure if there's anyone. Yalin, if you want to respond to anything, we can use this as an opportunity if there's anything else to add.
Sure, I'm going to jump forward to the federal
There we
efforts.
go. Perfect.
All right, since we are short on time anyway. And so there is a fair amount of legislation happening. I did want to mention that Senators Merkley and Whitehouse, along with Representative Doggett, are tomorrow introducing a resolution to make July 2024 the Plastic Pollution Action Month as part of Plastic Free July. So that is happening. The legislation that I most would like to highlight is the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. This is introduced by Senator Durbin and Representative Levin, and it would require the EPA to issue a rule prohibiting the discharge of pellets, aka nurdles, into the nation's waters. Weirdly, that is not exactly illegal right now, and it's a huge problem, as I think most folks on this call know. And the reason that I wanted to highlight this bill in particular is because of all the bills that are plastic pollution related in Congress right now, it actually has bipartisan support. Representative Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania has signed on as a co-sponsor, and that means that in a Congress that is mostly gridlocked, we actually have a chance to see this bill pass and make a meaningful difference in the pollution of our waterways. So that is exciting. There's also, of course, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is a major comprehensive act that has been introduced repeatedly through the last few Congresses, We have the Reducing Waste in National Parks Act, and that would direct the National Park Service to establish a program to reduce single-use plastic products. And it is a sort of companion to the Department of Interior order, which I will talk about in a moment as well. Senator Booker and Representative Huffman have reintroduced the Protecting Communities from Plastics Act. This is really an environmental justice piece of legislation that would establish stricter rules for petrochemical plants for folks who are on the front lines of these terrible facilities that are causing cancer and asthma and all kinds of other additional health crises. There is additionally the Farewell to Foam Act, and that would phase out single-use plastic foam service products, and is being really sponsored by a number of our advocacy organizations. So let me. Okay, there we go. And then with the agency's federal efforts, we have the Department of Interior Executive Order, as I mentioned before. The DOI really has set some good goals of phasing out plastic products on department managed lands, and that includes everything from BLM to U.S. Fish and Wildlife to even the offices of the Department of Interior. So any public lands, they are looking to eliminate the procurement, sale, and distribution of single-use plastic products. Each of the departments, agencies, and bureaus, et cetera, have submitted plans to the Department of Interior. We, as an advocacy organization, Surfrider has various opinions about the effectiveness of some of the plans that are proposed, and we would like to see a faster timeline. But this is where we are right now, and it's heartening to see that there is progress being made. The General Services Administration, which is not normally an agency that we spend a lot of time talking about, has finalized a rule to help reduce single-use plastic. However, the rule is focused primarily on packaging and not actual products. So while it may help to reduce single-use plastics, it will not necessarily help to reduce actual single-use plastic products. And since the United States government is the largest purchaser of plastic products, we are looking to see a stronger effort being made through the General Services Administration. And I wanted to flag that the EPA recently created a webpage on their sustainable management of plastic. So it has a whole bunch of information on the different areas in which they are working. So happy to answer more questions in further detail if anybody has them. And then international efforts, as a few other folks mentioned, the International Negotiating Committee meeting number 4 took place in Ottawa, and it was interesting, to say the least. I was able to attend along with Surfrider Canada, and I also wanted to just highlight one of the really inspiring takeaways is that the number of youth representatives who were there and the engagement of youth. Surfriders club network representatives were able to attend. And so, I think for all of us on this call, we know that the work that we do will need to be carried on. It's a long-term problem, and it was just very inspiring to see so many young people there really committed to helping push forward solutions to the problems. And just as a quick sort of lay of the political land, there is a high ambition coalition that consists of about 66 countries currently. There is also a unofficial coalition of what they are calling themselves the like-minded countries. Those are primarily the oil producing and petrochemical producing countries, and they are on not the same side as the high ambition coalition. And the United States is not aligned with either, but is not, I'm trying to be thoughtful with my words, given that we are here for information and not advocacy, but we would like to see the United States closer to the High Ambition Coalition. And right now they are, I would say, closer to the like-minded countries and what we are attempting through the State Department to see in the treaty. So the next meeting takes place at the end of November, beginning of December in Busan in the Republic of Korea. And that will be scheduled to be the final negotiating session. And the treaty is supposed to be finalized, by the end of the spring of next year. At this point, there is some intercessional work being done, and I could go on and on about the treaty forever, so I'll stop now, but happy to answer any questions about that. And that is all that I have for you. So I want to try to keep it short to bring us back.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. Though I can't respond to any pending legislation, I appreciate having groups like you that are able to come here and share kind of the work that's being done, as well as California Product Storage Council. I do see one quick question that Sam added, which was relevant to the Chevron deference, which I know I've been keeping an eye on the past week or so. Do you have any quick thoughts or responses to that before we move forward?
Sure. Oops. I believe that the efforts that we are working on, particularly with the agencies, the federal agencies, will not be helped by, to say the least, by the recent changes. So I think that the efforts that the agencies are putting forth to reduce plastic pollution will be compromised and slowed down at best. And then with the chances we can actually meet the deadline, it depends on who you ask. That is a great question. But I think right now things are moving and the deadline is still anticipated to be met. What happens at INC 5 will be a great determiner.
Thank you for those diplomatic answers. I appreciate that. With that, are there any further questions for either of our policy speakers? If not, we can pivot to kind of closing us out on announcements.
Okay, well, thank you all, and thank you, Christy, for closing us out. This is now our time. We'll take a little bit of time to hear if anyone in our OLS community has announcements they want to share, updates about what they're working on, other information sharing. We have just 2 on our end that we can start with, and then we'll open up the floor for others. So first, I just wanted to flag that the California Water Quality Monitoring Council is having the Microplastics Monitoring Work Group is having a subcommittee meeting tomorrow. This is open to the public. It'll be a Zoom meeting. We can put the link in the chat. And this is really, again, an opportunity for hearing from experts. It's a exchange of information, resources, research for understanding microplastics monitoring methods and tools. And second, we will hear updates from our colleagues at California Sea Grant, Tanya Torres. Thank you for sharing this, and please go ahead and take it away.
Hi all, thank you. Yeah, I'll be quick. We've presented on this, I think, a couple times at previous webinars, and so just again to announce that we have been working behind the scenes, myself, California Sea Grant, and Christine and Christy from OPC and NOAA to kind of work on this project that we've been awarded funding called the Working Towards Advancing Equitable Resources to Marine Debris Solutions through the California Ocean Litter Prevention Strategy. So next slide, please. This came from back in 2022. We had conducted a SWOT analysis with the Ocean Litter Strategy community, and among some issues such as funding and staff turnover, there was also concern about missing perspectives and priorities. And historically, we know that underserved and low-income neighborhoods suffer a lot of disproportionate negative impacts of plastic pollution, like throughout the entire life cycle, production, with air quality, consumption, use of plastics, microplastics, and then of course the waste aspect and litter and things like that. And so what we also recognized was that the organizations that actually serve maybe these areas, these groups that are working on these issues, weren't having a lot of engagement in this more high-level statewide ocean litter prevention strategy, meaning that our conversations and even some of the actions and priorities in the plan we're having low representation or involvement from communities that I think were intended to be directly served by this strategy. And so there's an incredible need and also opportunity, though, to allow for environmental justice or BIPOC groups to kind of be brought into the planning, especially as we're looking toward closing out this one in a new version or the new iteration of the ocean litter strategy, and have these groups kind of help lead and inform our management of this strategy and ensure that the solutions and the direction of this plan to address plastic pollution and trash pollution are more community informed and driven. I know that is a highlight, a strength of this plan and something that we value. And so we wanted to see how we can improve in those areas. Next slide. And so again, the funding we got was from the National Sea Grant Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. And so myself with California Sea Grant, USC Sea Grant, and the Ocean Protection Council, we've been awarded funding to work on advancing more equitable solutions through leveraging this group. And so our objectives were to first and foremost identify kind of and engage those missing perspectives and sectors through a gap analysis, which we have concluded. And I believe maybe when we have more time at a future webinar, we can present all the data and what we found, just reviewing all of our engagement and participants over the years. And then we're also conducting a pilot community needs assessment in the Los Angeles region. And we chose LA specifically because there's a particularly great pollution burden in LA. And they also have a lot of efforts going on tackling plastic pollution. So we thought it was a great nexus for us to start and see how we can expand further after that. And then of course, because financial burden and capacity issues are some of the top barriers and challenges for any and all community engagement. Our second objective of this project was to see how we can actually inform more coordinated investments into community-based solutions and efforts. And so that more to come in the future with that. And so my final slide is, you go to, we can skip this. Yeah, my final slide is that basically what we envision coming out of this project is that we could have more increased meaningful engagement from community-based groups, environmental justice groups, or California tribes, and being more involved in the planning and priorities of this strategy. An informed and more inclusive and effective next version. So we are getting to that time. I think it was talked about earlier in this webinar. So that's kind of the hope from the results of this project can really feed into how we plan the next one. And of course, we just want more increased connections between the communities that are on the ground doing the work and the priorities that are happening at the state level. And that's about a good summary there. I can stop there. So, my contact information and the project partners as well. So thank you. And I'll pass it on back.
Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate the update. And if there are any other announcements or questions from folks, now's the time to raise your hands, add to the chat, or let us know if there's anything else on your minds or to share with the group.
All right, giving it a few more minutes. Not hearing or seeing anything. I'm going to just close us out really. Oh, thank you, Evan. I'm happy I bought some time. Evan, please feel free to unmute yourself.
He's trying to connect, sorry. He's next to me on another cubicle.
Thanks, Vivian.
He's having issues with unmuting himself.
Well, why I've been trying to figure out technology. I'm sorry, I'm not using
Sorry, I
Zoom.
can tell him. I can tell you. He's including in the chat. He wants to remind everybody that this year is a very special year for Coastal Cleanup Day. We're celebrating the 40th anniversary, and it's going to be on September 21st around the entire state. Remember that it's not only on the coast. And you can visit our website for all the details. And I hope you, your colleagues and family members, everybody join us. It's Saturday, September 21st. And you can check also his chatting as I speak here.
Thank you so much, Vivian and the California Commission team. And appreciate you, Evan. And yeah, we are so excited. And I know I am to celebrate the 40th. So I'll hopefully see you out there as well. Any other questions? Just more excitement about the cleanup. That's awesome. Without seeing any other hands, Christine, maybe we can just move forward to the next slide. And I'm always happy to stop at. I know it was mentioned today of kind of like, where are we going? And what a good question that is. Here's kind of a snapshot of what we have going on the next year or so. So we are in the last year of our 6-year plan. Again, it started in 2018, closing out this year. And we're really trying to take an intentional and steady approach to kind of the closeout, but certainly we'll be including you all. So for this webinar, this was part of our process of still trying to use our last year for information sharing. And so Christine and I and Ocean Protection Council will continue to try to brainstorm, sending surveys back and potential calls to really try to understand what are the needs and what do you want to see in the next iteration. Again, we want to make this useful. So these are the type of conversations we will hopefully be having with you in the coming year. There's been discussion and hopeful of potentially some in-person symposium. I've always heard that with these action plans, it's always been wonderful to have people come together. And so Christina and I are doing our best to figure out what that looks like or what budget we have to do that. But we are optimistic to try to do at least something to bring ourselves together. And so all of those things are in motion. But if you have an idea, if you feel strongly about anything, Christine and I are here and we would love your feedback, because again, we want to make this useful of what works for you all. And we also will be incorporating what Tanya just mentioned as far as equity, looking at what's happening in LA and how do we expand those lessons learned out beyond that. So that was really quick. More information to come, and keep an eye out from emails from me or Christine. With that, Christine, if you can go to the next slide. Just thank you for being on this call for quite a time. Thank you to our speakers that just provided such a great lineup of different topics. And just thank you for all the work that you do day to day across all of you entities for just making this happen and addressing litter. It has to happen as a team, and it takes a village. So with that, next slide. We have our resources available. Christina and I will also be following up, sharing a webinar, webinar recording. Speakers will follow up with you to get your final slides. And we'll do our best to continue updating these sites to make all this information available to you, which is a nice segue for me to show. Next slide, please. That all these and all past webinars, the recordings are made available on our public our Google folder that is available to our partners. This will be included in our follow-up link, but just wanted to highlight that this information is available. You just might have to do some digging, but if you have any questions, please reach out to me. And with that, I'll go to the last slide I have, and I see Chris has a hand up. But with that, just really echoing, please reach out to Christine and I. We love this project and we love working on it, and we'd love to do better. So with that, Chris, on the mic, any
Thanks,
updates?
everybody.
Any
Thank you,
questions?
Christy. Thank you, Christine, and everybody else that contributed today. Great by Sam as well. Can we get those websites in that list? Because I'm always being asked to wrangle and corral all of the websites that are relevant to this group and all the other groups that you and I have been on over the years with Tanya and so on and so forth. So if you could do that, that would be great.
Yeah, well, Christine, how about we take that as an action for us, that all the ones that were discussed today, especially from our speakers, we'll make sure those are included in a follow-up after this meeting and share that out. really good. I know there's a lot of different websites, and especially with me speaking federal government wise, it's always hard to find those website links, especially when it's on that. So thank you so much, Chris. Any other
Especially
questions
when
or
you need
thoughts?
'em.
Yep, exactly. Appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. With that, any other thoughts, questions, ideas, anything you'd like to share for intentions before we hop off? Christine, anything I missed?
No, that was a great wrap up. Thank you, everyone. And feel free to reach out to us anytime, but we will share all of this in a follow-up email.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right.
Have a
Thank you,
great one.
everyone. Have a good rest of your
Bye-bye.
week.